Are you sick and tired of all the Denver Broncos draft talk? Well, Patrick Chiotti and I have got the show for you because today we are not going to talk about any draft stuff whatsoever. In fact, what we're going to do is take you on a little cruise back in time and discuss who is on our Mount Rushmore of Denver Bronco players with the kicker that they cannot be in the Hall of Fame, or at least Hall of Fame imminently bound. This is Altitude Adjustment.
Hey, Bill, I'm in the mood for a switch up. I hit the function, hit the rose till I hiccup. I hit the stage and leave with money that's a stick up.
See, Pat, I think part of the reason that I didn't want to do any draft talk today is because our show last week was so unbelievably good, where we
It was all
played
draft.
coach and GM and did a mock draft, arguably the greatest mock draft that Broncos country has ever seen. So good, in fact, that we should be getting calls from the front office, from the Walton Penner group, to, maybe take a job in the front office. And we had to tell them, look, we're just here for entertainment purposes. We like to educate, but we're here to entertain. And that's just not really our bag. So, Pat, today we're going to talk about the Broncos Mount Rushmore of players who are not in the Hall of Fame. And so, Pat, I'm just going to say this, and for anyone watching, and as you can see, this is not live, so leave all the mean comments that you want. We're not going to see them. We're excluding a guy like Von Miller, who is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, right?
Obvious.
So Von Miller will be on the Mount Rushmore of Broncos, but this is kind of like the under the radar guys, if you will, Pat. So why don't you start us off, the first member on your Broncos Mount Rushmore?
Look, here's a guy who has a very near and dear place in the hearts of a lot of Broncos country. Just like a guy who does the dirty work. As a coach, I love guys who do the dirty work. I love guys who got a lot of nasty in their game, right? Not like a stink kind of nasty, but a lot of nasty.
Like actual nasty, like
Yes.
actual disgustingly nasty.
And I love players who, underdog stories and, coming from smaller schools and, round out these really successful careers. And the first guy on my list is going to be Tom Nalen. Now, this is a guy who a lot of Broncos fans, he very well could be in the Hall of Fame when it's all said and done.
He should be right now.
Probably should be. 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, was an All-Pro second team in 1999. But this is a guy who was a 7th-round pick, 218th overall pick out of Boston College, 14 years in the league. That's pretty unheard of. A guy who's a 7th-round pick as a center, making 188 starts in his career, a couple Super Bowl championships, few Super Bowl appearances. Just a guy who played for a really long time, saw through multiple quarterback changes in Broncos country and stayed the entire time. He was a guy who manned that offensive line for years, was a big part of the Broncos run attack under Mike Shanahan, and into the early 2000s. I absolutely love Tom Nalen and what he was able to do for the Denver Broncos in that time when, I'm little. A lot of, Broncos country in our age range was, just growing up and watching this team. And we got to see a guy who anchored the offensive line, who is relatively quiet, but just a big, nasty sumbitch who really helped break out the Broncos run game in multiple eras too. Terrell Davis to Clinton Portis to Mike Anderson to Tatum Bell. Like he helped those guys really get into their own as NFL running backs. So salute to Tom Nalen, big Mile High salute to Tom Nalen. That's my first guy on the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, that's a fantastic pick. And like we're saying, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame now. If he was a Steeler or a Cowboy or a Bear,
Automatic.
Might have even been a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I honestly don't think, because what do they say, Pat? You can't tell the story, or can you tell the story of football without said player? And it's such a ridiculous statement to make, because it's all about perspective. Like, for the perspective of a Broncos fan, you can't really tell the story of the Denver Broncos without Tom Nalen. I mean, you listed all of these running backs. Like, Pat, they put Reuben Drones back there and he rushed for 1,000 yards. Olandis Gary, like you said, Mike Anderson, I think in 2 different stints. They had Clinton Portis. He was fantastic. Obviously, they traded him for Champ Bailey. Ended up being a great trade for both teams, maybe a little bit better for Denver. But then there was this big hole at the running back position. And at that point, it didn't matter, because every guy that you put back there rushed for at least 1,000 yards. And Nalen was the anchor. And I love the part where you said that he was relatively quiet. In fact, he was silent, Pat. He came up with this idea that the offensive line would not speak. They didn't talk to the media. The little player introductions they did before primetime games, they didn't introduce themselves. They did not speak at all. And it was this like collective thing that Tom Nalen came up with, because he's like, you shouldn't know who we are. If you don't know who we are, then we're doing our jobs. And that was probably my favorite thing about Tom Nalen. So he absolutely deserves a spot there. For my first pick, I'm going to take it back a couple of decades. In fact, it's going to be a guy that was on our very show, Pat. I mean, how many Broncos-related podcasts can say that they had the great Rick Upchurch on there? As far as I know, only one. And it's really the only one that you need to be watching. And it's, oh my God, it's Altitude Adjustment. I can't believe it.
That one.
Let me list you some accolades from Rick Upchurch, because granted, he was before my time. Okay. So if there are any old heads watching this, I think they're really going to appreciate Rick Upchurch being on this list. But for any of the people who started watching Broncos football starting in the 2000s, a lot of people at LTB who weren't even alive for their back-to-back Super Bowls might have no clue who Rick Upchurch is. So let me clue you in. 3-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time second-team All-Pro, 4-time Pro Bowler. He was part of the NFL 1970s and 1980s All-Decade team. Not the Broncos All-Decades team. That's the NFL All-Decades teams in 2 different decades. He was the PFWA All-Rookie team. He's a member of the Broncos Ring of Fame, and he was a member of their 50th anniversary team. Widely regarded as one of the greatest return specialists of all time. In fact, his record for return touchdowns stood for decades until it was broken by Devin Hester. Now, is there an argument for Rick Upchurch to be in the Hall of Fame? I think with Hester being in, Pat, he needs to get serious consideration.
I think so.
Because we're talking, like, he was a really good receiver, but he kind of revolutionized the kick and punt return game in the NFL. And so if we're using that measuring stick, can you tell the story of the NFL without this player? Again, you certainly can't tell the story of the Denver Broncos without Rick Upchurch. I mean, this was a time before John Elway, where their offense, they didn't have the automatic offense they did for so many of those John Elway years. That was Rick Upchurch and what he did in the return game.
Yeah, and I mean, with the NFL putting in Devin Hester, now it's like bringing a kind of respect to punt and kick return specialists. I think you have to put Rick Upchurch in that conversation. The fact that the record stood for so long, that's a big thing, right? Like you had decades of players come and go without breaking that record until one special talent in the early 2000s was able to do that. I think Rick Upchurch has a solid case to be a Hall of Famer if that's, like you said, if that's the measuring stick that they're going to use. He's kind of what we would consider to be a gadget guy now in the NFL. So I think there's a very strong case. I think that's a perfect person to put up there on the Mount Rushmore.
Who's your number 2 guy?
Okay, so my number 2 guy is another oldie, but another goodie. Ranked top 10 in Denver Broncos history in interceptions. He is also a 5-time Pro Bowler, also a 2-time first team All Pro, and that is cornerback Lou Wright. 26 career interceptions, just was one of the best defenders that the Broncos had. Guys like Chris Harris Jr. and Champ Bailey always talked about the inspiration of Louis Wright and what he was able to do for the Denver Broncos organization and defensive players playing in Denver. Shut down corner before the real term shut down corner came around. 3 straight years as a Pro Bowler, 2 straight years as a first team All Pro, was even a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in 1979. Like I said, like you said, you just can't tell the story of the Denver Broncos without Louis Wright. I think that he absolutely should be on the Mount Rushmore. Being a top 10 guy and not being in the Hall of Fame, it's kind of crazy.
And again, what is it about the Hall of Fame committee? And granted, they're starting to come around as of late a little bit more.
Yeah.
But this Denver Broncos franchise is storied, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so bizarre to me that it seems like every dude that ever put on a jersey for the Steelers, the Cowboys, hell, even the Chiefs, find themselves in the Hall of Fame despite having, for the most part, a run-of-the-mill career. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's something about the committee or if there's some sort of bias or something that we're missing when it comes to this. But,
yeah, and
honestly, the guys that we've listed so far, Pat, and the next guy that I'm going to list also has a strong case.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to imagine a really strong case to leave them off of this list.
And there's 3 players. So, when the Hall of Fame is looking at players, we kind of have to measure them up against other players, right? And there's 3 players that Louis Wright's career are very similar to. And all 3 of these people are in the Hall of Fame. Ty Law, who recently got into the Hall of Fame, Donnie Shell, and another Denver Bronco, Steve Atwater. Very similar career quality, similar length. He played for 12 seasons. So I think there's a strong case that he could be a Hall of Famer, and he's still top 10 in Denver Broncos history in interceptions, and he stopped playing in 1986. So we're approaching 40 years of him not even being in the league, and he's still top 10 in that category.
That's insane. Next guy on my list, I teased it a little bit, and I think if there was one Bronco right now that collectively fans really would love to see in the Hall of Fame and absolutely think that he deserves it, is Rod Smith. Arguably the greatest undrafted wide receiver of all time. And with me, it's not really an argument, and I'm not willing to hear any sort of arguments.
Nope.
2-time Super Bowl champion, obviously. And if you think back to Super Bowl 33, Pat, had it not been John Elway's swan song, very real possibility that Rod Smith wins the Super Bowl MVP that year. 2-time second All-Pro, or 2-time second team All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler. He led the league in receptions in 2001, which is post Elway, mind you. I think that was that might have been a Jake Plummer or Brian. That was Brian Greasy year.
That's Greasy.
He's in the Denver Broncos Hall of Fame. He was part of their 50th anniversary team. And by the way, he was a first-team D2 All-American, and he is in the College Football Hall of Fame. 849 career receptions, 11,389 career receiving yards, 68 career touchdowns.
All of which are at the top, Mario. All of which are at the top. He ranks first in receiving in all of those categories
with the Broncos. Yeah,
even absolutely. Targets. He's the most targeted player in Broncos history.
If you were to ask me, I think that Rod is the most glaring omission from the Hall of Fame in terms of former Broncos. And the majority of the guys that we're listing, I think, all have a strong case. And honestly, none stronger than Rod Smith. And I'm looking at it here. He ranks 30th all-time for receptions and 34th all-time for yards. So he's top 34 in both of those categories. And after Calvin Johnson got inducted, there are 31 wide receivers in the Hall of Fame. And I just can't think that you can like realistically say that there are 31 all-time receivers better than Rod Smith who meant more to their teams in that period of time. And oh, by the way, Pat, 14 years in the NFL, every single one of them with Denver, which is almost an impossible
Mhm.
achievement in today's
Mhm.
NFL.
And some of the players, again, looking at careers and career arcs and similarities, some of these players, Lance Allworth in the Hall of Fame, Julio Jones, Torrey Holt, Paul Warfield in the Hall of Fame, Michael Irvin in the Hall of Fame, Jimmy Smith, Reggie Wayne, Roddy White, Cliff Branch, Hall of Famer, and Randy Moss, Hall of Famer. Similar career quality and shape, 12 years in the NFL. Rod Smith undoubtedly should be a Hall of Famer. I don't know what is taking them so long. And again, another guy who wasn't a first round pick, right? A lot of those guys that I just listed off, they were first round picks. This is a guy who went undrafted out
They're
of
high profile
Missouri
guys.
Southern.
Yeah.
Missouri Southern. Like, put this man in the Hall of Fame. Undersized for a wide receiver, was one of the toughest dudes, great blocker, easily my favorite receiver to watch growing up, and just an all-around nice guy. Definitely deserving of Broncos Hall of Fame, Ring of Fame, Mount Rushmore. But come on, NFL, put Rod Smith in the Hall of Fame. What are we doing? He's so far ahead on the list. And I mean, we've had players like Demaryius Thomas, who, we might talk about here. Cortland Sutton is climbing up that list, right? But who knows how long he's going to be on the Denver Broncos. Rod Smith is still at the top for catches, yards, receiving touchdowns. There is no question that he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Who's your third member?
So, my third member is someone who we're all familiar with. This is somebody who did revolutionize the game of football in the modern age, mind you. He revolutionized. He is also in the top. Hang on. He's also in the top 10, I believe, in interceptions. Let me just double check this. Just outside. He's ranked 12th. But revolutionized the slot cornerback position to what it is now, and one of the highest paid positions in the secondary, and that's Chris Harris Jr. Another undrafted guy who had to grind and work his way up, but became a very central point of the Broncos defense during the Manning years and even pre-Manning. Just a very solid player on the defensive side of the ball, great instincts, leadership skills, was unselfish, but always looked to make everyone else around him better. Just a dog among dogs. Chris Harris Jr. is my third player on the Broncos Mount Rushmore, who isn't in the Hall of Fame. And I'll tell you what, there is a strong case for Chris Harris Jr. to be in the Hall of Fame, right? Looking at his numbers year after year, and his production, not only in the regular season, but in the playoffs, Chris Harris Jr. undoubtedly, to me, is a Hall of Famer. Will definitely be a Broncos Ring of Famer. Can't wait for that day to come so that I can celebrate with him. But this is a dude that I feel like the NFL should give consideration to as an NFL Hall of Famer because of his contributions and his changing of how defense is played in the NFL now. We look back at all of these other players who have changed and paved the way for new positions to be created within the game of football. Chris Harris made the slot cornerback position so valuable that now every single team has to find that one guy who can maybe recreate a little bit of what Chris Harris was able to do.
And I think another case for Chris Harris is like you said, he revolutionized that position where teams didn't really have a slot corner per se before Chris Harris kind of took up that mantle. If you look across the league, at least like before the Broncos added Aqib Talib, Chris Harris Jr. was the best cornerback on their roster for a long time. And you could even make the case that, Talib got the interceptions, he got the touchdowns. You can make the case that at that time, Chris Harris Jr. was actually a more effective cornerback. And where I'm going with this is if you look around the league, especially like currently or in the last 5-10 years, the best cornerback on your team is not the slot corner. That was not the case with Chris Harris. He was routinely the best corner on your team as a slot corner, and that's just not something that you see very often.
Four-time Pro Bowler, first team All Pro one time, second team All Pro 2 times, and like we were saying with the other guys, some players that are similar: Aqib Talib, Chris McAllister, Rodney Harrison, Asante Samuel, Patrick Surtain, all names that are very, very high up there. But he definitely falls in line with a lot of those guys. And I'd consider a few of them to be Hall of Famers. So consider Chris Harris Jr. for NFL Hall of Fame. NFL.
Please. We know you're watching. So do the right thing there.
Come on, Raj.
Third guy on my list, and this one is very near and dear to my heart. And people are going to call me a little bit of a homer for this one, but I'm going to say Justin Simmons. Okay,
I love it.
I think the big knock against Justin here, Pat, is he never went to the playoffs. Really through no fault of his own. He unfortunately joined the team the year after they won the Super Bowl, and really for a lot of years, Pat was the only bright spot on this team. Like, how often is a safety your franchise player? And for several years, that's exactly what Justin Simmons was. And not just what he did on the field, but I think he deserves the recognition. Like, one of the big reason I'm putting him on my Mount Rushmore, all the stuff that he did off the field. Multiple time Walter Payton Man of the Year candidate, started his own charity, did a ton of charity work, was consistently involved in the community. But what he did on the field was incredibly impressive too. Now, keep in mind, this was during a huge influx of all different kinds of defensive coordinators, all different kinds of head coaches, a team that never had a captain, a team that really never had an identity, never had a direction. All they had, the only consistency that this team had from the time he was drafted to the time that they released him last year was Justin Simmons. He was a 4-time second-team All-Pro, 2-time Pro Bowler, led the league in interceptions in 2002, and he has 32 career interceptions, which I think is 7th or 8th. 2022. 2022.
8th.
I know he's top 10 in interceptions in Broncos history. You said he's 8th?
8th in Broncos history.
And that was in 8 years that he was able to climb that. I mean, compared to Chris Harris Jr., now granted, they obviously play a different position and their games were a little bit different, but Justin had more interceptions than somebody like Chris Harris Jr., which is incredibly remarkable to me. At this point, man, I'm just praying that Justin makes the playoffs, that he gets to taste the playoffs one time in his career before he can call it quits. And again, maybe I'll get some pushback and some flack for this. And, obviously, Justin feels like a member of my family. I've known him since he was a rookie. I've worked with him since he was a rookie. We're friends. Our kids are friends. But for my personal Mount Rushmore, man, I can't keep him off. Now, if he plays 4 or 5 more seasons, which knowing Justin, I don't think he's going to want to do, and he continues to play at a high level, maybe he starts to get into that conversation of Hall of Fame, but he'll be a Broncos Ring of Famer, almost guaranteed. I just don't think that he enjoyed enough success to really be in that sort of consideration. He didn't have the Joe Thomas type of career where even though you never went to the playoffs, you were the best player at your position for pretty much the entire time that you played. But for my money, man, the best free safety in Denver Broncos history, and I don't think it's relatively close. Assuming that we're putting Steve Atwater as a strong safety.
That's pretty interesting. I think what you talked about with the off-field stuff and the type of player that Justin is, still is, because he's still a free agent, but the type of player that he was for the Broncos. I mean, this was a guy, another one of those people who it was in a weird space when he came to the team, and he tried to make it his own. Right? He tried to, he was definitely a leader on and off the field. You could see that guys kind of rallied around him, and when he was let go, it was a lot of shock to a lot of us because we thought Justin Simmons was going to be a Bronco for the rest of his life.
I still haven't recovered.
Been very blessed to have met Justin, thanks to you, and chat with him. And I can tell you right now that, just in the conversations that I've had with him, like one of the smartest dudes to have ever graced the orange and blue, and one of the most down to earth humans, but he's also the same dude who will run through your fucking face. And won't think twice about it. It was awesome to see his growth. Another guy from Boston College. Look at that. But it was awesome to see his growth coming into the league, coming into a situation like that, and then paving the career that he had in Denver. I definitely think he belongs on that Broncos Mount Rushmore. You're totally right in saying that. Don't let the homer thing get in your way. But yeah, man, I think that he's very deserving, and I'm excited to see where he goes. I had a post on Twitter earlier about some interesting comments that he made, but I'm kind of excited to see where he goes.
I will tell you this, and I'll just say, like, what Pat's referring to is, like, he's not ruling out the possibility of playing for the Chiefs. But I want to remind everybody, like, Justin Simmons is an incredibly intelligent human being. Not a lot of dummies go to Boston College, okay? Justin knows exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it. You are never, ever, ever going to burn any sort of bridge. But speaking personally, I would be absolutely shocked if he were to ever play for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Pat, if it's a situation where they're paying him what he thinks he's worth, and that's the only offer that he has, this is kind of what he's talking about. Like, it would be stupid to say that. He's not going to belligerently come out publicly and say, I'll never play for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't think you're ever going to hear any sort of professional athlete say that in any capacity. And if they are, then they might be suffering from a little bit of CTE. So just to clear that up. And then maybe this is me coping a little bit, Pat, because I've told Justin multiple times that if he were, big time. If he would have ever joined the Chiefs, I was like, look, we won't be friends. As soon as you are no longer a Chief, we can resume our friendship. But for the period of time that you hypothetically play for the Chiefs, you are, for all intents and purposes, dead to me.
Yeah.
A lot of copium being taken right now.
It would be. Before I get to my last player, I do want to do a little honorable mention, little honorable shout out. Tyrone Braxton.
Okay? Fun player.
Is ranked 4th in Broncos team history in interceptions, including a 9-interception season in 1996, where he made a Pro Bowl. Really fun player, 34 career interceptions with Denver. Did play a year for Miami in 1994, but played until he was 35. 13-year career, pretty damn good. That's little honorable mention. But my last player, Mario, and I know you wanted this guy, but I put him first. You were close with him as well. Probably one of my favorite modern era Broncos picks. I was super excited when they took him. A lot of question marks surrounding him because he played at a school where, they didn't run a ton of routes. It was mostly hitches and goes. This guy transformed the Denver Broncos, and especially after Peyton Manning got here, he really blossomed into one of the greatest receivers that this team has ever seen in the history of their existence. I'm talking, of course, about Demaryius Thomas. An amazing human being off the field. But man, when he was playing, the size, the speed, yes, bring it out. The size, the speed, the smile on this guy's face. There wasn't a player that I loved more. You find me an X receiver that could take a smoke screen 60 plus yards without getting touched, right? you're going to be hard pressed to find that. Some of my favorite catches. One of the most admirable players in Denver Broncos history. The day he was traded away to the Houston Texans, I will I basically fell to my knees because I did not want to see that era end. And I think there's a lot of things that went on with DT that people didn't know about. And ultimately, up to his passing, there were still a lot of things that people didn't know about. But this guy, man, like you can speak to him better than I can, but you can just tell off the field, this dude is 100% genuine, hardworking. Just always wanted it bad. Whenever I got the chance to ask Chris about DT, he just the shine, right? The shine on his face. And he would always say, no one worked harder. No one worked harder than DT. Didn't matter what was going on. Didn't matter who the quarterback was, what the deal was. He was always going to outwork everybody. And man, we miss him. Certainly should be in the Hall of Fame someday. But definitely on the Mount Rushmore of Denver Broncos right now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And granted, you did take my fourth guy because we would both be remiss if we left Demarius off this list. And you can't say enough good things about him. That he was the ultimate teammate. In fact, funny story about like what a great teammate and what a great dude Demarius Thomas was. When Garrett Bowles was a rookie, he was not the most well-liked person in the locker room, to the point where, I would have these conversations with him and he would kind of say like, I don't think anybody really likes me on the team. And I'm like, really? That can't be true. He goes, well, except for DT. Like DT, that's my brother, man. DT is the best. So it is just funny to me because, here's a guy in Garrett Bowles who has come a long way and felt like a little bit of an outcast. He was an older rookie. I think we all know he's he's a little bit of a different guy. Yeah. And he had a hard time fitting in early in his NFL career. And lo and behold, of course, the one person who was there for him and the one person that Garrett considered to be a friend was Demarius. And that was just indicative of the kind of person that Demarius was. You certainly cannot tell the story of the Denver Broncos as a whole without him. And again, like everything that he did on the field, everything that he did off the field, no bad publicity, no bad press, nothing like that, kept his nose clean and was just a pillar in the community. I know he would go to the Boys and Girls Club in, different areas around Denver just to hang out. They wouldn't even have to ask him. It's like if he had free time, like if he wasn't perfecting his craft, which he was doing almost 100% of his free time, he was at the Boys and Girls Club just hanging out with those little kids. And yeah, I mean, I'm getting choked up just talking about it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But yeah, Demarius, all-time player, all-time great guy. And even today, Pat, like we just don't see receivers built like Demarius Thomas with his size and his skill set. 6'3", 225 coming out, ran a sub 4.4. Like you said, ran go routes and screen passes at Georgia Tech, and that was pretty much it. And yet somehow became one of the preeminent route runners in the league. Now, a lot of that obviously is because that's what Peyton Manning demanded, and he put the work in. And despite being all of 6'3", 225 pounds, was routinely one of the best route runners in the entire NFL. It's like the amount of times that he seemed to get wide open was head scratching. Yeah. It's like, how is a guy that's this big, that is this good and this explosive, getting this open? And that's just how good Demarius Thomas was. So
I remember
I
was just going to say, I remember that draft very well, right? Because that's the Tebow draft.
And everyone wanted Des Bryant, Pat. And
yeah, I was going to say,
we're like disappointed.
Everybody wanted Des Bryant, and I remember when the pick was called, and I remember seeing seeing the videos of him at Georgia Tech. They're playing the highlights, and he's catching these like 5-yard hitches and just breaking tackles and
outrunning everybody.
I'm like, God dang, man! Like he's
a freak.
This guy's big and he's fast. Like I don't know. I think we'll be okay. Like part of me wanted Des Bryant, but man, like I was like, okay, like let's see where this goes, right? And man, paid off tremendously. First team All Pro in 2014, second team All Pro in 2013. You know, what, 5-time Pro Bowler? I mean, damn, man, like just and like an unbelievable stretch from 2012 to 2014. Just incredible to watch him grow as a player and grow out of that, like, oh, like him and Calvin Johnson, literally, like when you look at their career arcs, they're listed in the same breath, right? Because of the length and production and all that stuff. But both are from Georgia Tech. Both came out of that mold, right? So it's great to see DT mentioned in that same breath, because Calvin Johnson was another one of those just freak athletes, but became a really nuanced route runner in the NFL. Demaryius Thomas, same kind of player. So I'm really glad that the Denver Broncos traded up and took Demaryius Thomas instead of Des Bryant.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and if you ever need to know what kind of player Demaryius was, in a very forgettable Super Bowl VIII, he was the lone bright spot. I mean, and
Yeah,
I don't think a lot of people know this, Pat,
he
but at
set
the
the
time,
record.
he set the record for receptions in that game. He got hurt actually early on in that game. Cam Chancellor came down, laid the wood on him, jacked up his neck, jacked up his shoulder, still went on to set a Super Bowl record at the time for receptions. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget about that, Pat, obviously, because that game
He
was
was
so
the option.
unbelievably forgettable.
He
But
was the
I mean,
only
we
option.
remember it was over at halftime, right? And then Seattle returned. I mean, Percy Harvin returned the opening kick of the second half, and
It
then it
was
was
over
really
at the
over.
snap.
Then
It
it
was
was
over at the snap.
really over. And despite that, Pat, Demaryius had no quit on him. It was the reason that the Broncos even were able to put points on the board in that game. And so, just it's just a microcosm of the kind of player that he was, where it's like you're down and out, but it was the biggest stage, and he showed up more than any other player on the field for the Broncos that day. So since you took Demaryius as your fourth and final player, and rightfully so, I'm going to call a little bit of an audible here. And I'm going to mention a dude who was a fan favorite, maybe a guy that, some of the people in LTB and some of the younger fans maybe got a chance to grow up with, but maybe was like still a little bit before their time. And that was Al Wilson. Man, they just don't make linebackers like Al Wilson anymore. 6 foot, 240 pounds. That dude was an absolute load.
Cake.
And the reason that I say they don't really make linebackers like that anymore is because, linebackers now they're a little bit more slender. They need to be able to move better. They need to be able to cover and pass, cover the pass. Al Wilson could do all of that and more. So the fact that he was so big, so stout, and still moved as well as he did, and it's a shame that it seems like he doesn't get the national recognition he deserves, but he only played for 7 seasons. And a lot of it was because of a nagging neck injury that just really never went away, which was also indicative of how he played the position. He would just knock the ever loving piss out of you if you were coming through that A gap. But in the 7 years that he played for Denver, Pat, 5-time bowler, he was a second team All Pro and a first team All Pro. Had he had a longer career, and that was a weird time with the Broncos. They were in the AFC Championship game in that 2005 season with Jake Plummer, and then we all remember the following year was the Plummer Cutler conundrum, and then I think the year after that was when Mike Shanahan got fired, and so there was a lot of tumultuous stuff kind of happening in that time period. But that resurgence that we saw of the Denver Broncos. He was drafted the year after they won their second Super Bowl. They had lost John Elway. They're lacking any sort of identity, and Al Wilson really kind of became the pulse and the heartbeat of that defense. So in a muddled time where you were kind of in between John Elway and then eventually Jake Plummer when it started to trend upward, Al Wilson was that guy who kind of was able to reform the identity of that football team. And another guy that I know personally, if you ever come into my office, we have his airbrush picture right up on our wall. I mean, Al Wilson was everything that you wanted out of a middle linebacker.
Yeah.
Not going to be in sort of consideration for the Hall of Fame, but that doesn't
No.
mean that he doesn't belong on my Broncos Mount Rushmore.
No, I think this is a great player to have on the Broncos Mount Rushmore. And like I look at him and I think, man, like was this was kind of the same way that Luke Kuechly kind of went out, right? Like he Kuechly didn't get his Super Bowl, but Al Wilson still had, man, an incredible career. 5-time Pro Bowler, All Pro, like you mentioned, All Pro second team, and then left the game before he was 30, right? Got cut from the Broncos in 07 and just, called it quits. He had the neck injury, and he had a very solid career for a middle linebacker. Over 100 tackles 3 times in his career, had 100 solo tackles in 2002, and probably one of the most memorable hits on Monday Night Football. My God.
On Tyrone Wheatley in the snow in the orange jerseys.
Yes. Like, my God, like
it was like a 4th and 1. Wheatley was like every bit of 240, 250 pounds. And he just knocked the ever-loving shit out of him.
And that is, I remember watching this dude as a kid and thinking, man, I want to be just like Al Wilson, right? And then John Lynch came along, and it was like, man, I want to be just like John Lynch. And the two of them on the defense together, and this is another thing too, why Al Wilson definitely deserves to be on the Broncos Mount Rushmore. Think about how he brought along a guy like DJ Williams. His impact on DJ Williams' career as a pro, and him as a young linebacker. Man, that team was crazy. That team was absolutely nuts. But Al Wilson's toughness and his ferocity just made him this scary player that when you watched games, I remember watching some games and thinking, that's a scary dude. I do not want to.
Yeah.
It made me second guess wanting to play football, because am I going to come across Al Wilson one of these days? The answer would have been yes. But like, man, like that's a scary guy playing, and I wish his career was longer. I wish he had more story, but man, 5 interceptions over his career, 46 PBUs. My goodness. I don't even know where that would rank. That is 7th.
I mean, over the course of 7 years 7th. For an inside linebacker, that's nuts.
7th in Broncos franchise history in PBUs. He is 9th right now in Broncos history in tackles. I mean, this was a guy who was your do-it-all middle linebacker. Obviously Carl Mecklenburg, like that's a guy that is going to be in the Hall of Fame, long overdue, but like Al Wilson, yeah, like that's a dude who should be in the Broncos Hall of Fame. I don't think NFL Hall of Fame level, because just, the career wasn't long
he just
enough.
Didn't play long enough.
Yeah, it wasn't,
unfortunately.
But man, Broncos Hall of Fame, I think there's a solid case.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope that you all have enjoyed our Mount Rushmore. If you're hanging out in the comments, make sure you drop if we left anybody out, or if you wanna get in on the chat. Again, Pat and I can't see it because this is pre-recorded, but we always appreciate you guys all watching. And just as a friendly reminder, next week we will be doing yet another rendition of arguably the best segment in all of Denver Broncos podcast history. Pat and I will be joined by 6 different members of the Denver Broncos media to form Engage 8, where we will take you through all the different draft scenarios. That's right, we will inevitably get back to draft talk because it is draft season. And we're going to give you everything that you need to make sure that you are prepared for the NFL draft. Pat, go ahead and plug your fantastic show that you do with the immaculate Bree Maestas.
Yeah, check out Believe in the Broncos on the Believe Network. Bree and I are going to be ramping up our draft coverage. We're going to have Joe DeLeon from Believe. He will be on, and we're also hoping to have Luca Evans on from the Denver Post to talk about some potential draft targets and what he thinks the Broncos team needs are going into the draft. And we'll be talking with some other people leading up to the draft about certain prospects from certain schools. So keep an eye out for those episodes. Make sure that you follow the show, subscribe to it, leave a review. Thank you so much.
My name's Mario Vitanzi. That is Patrick Chiotti. Follow us on Twitter at Patrick Chiotti, at Vitanzi Therapy, and we will see you with 6 of our friends next week. Love you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey, Bill, I'm in the mood for a switch up. I hit the function, hit the rose.